Hello and welcome to another Play Better Chess video. And so today, chess strategies and tactics. That's what I'm going to be covering. And I'll do that by going over a game from 1834 played in London, England between the French chess master Louis de la Bourdonnais, or is it Louis de la Bourdonnais, versus Alexander McDonald. So at this time in 1834, there wasn't an official world chess champion. And these two players, one from England and one from France, they had a series of matches and they played quite a few games against one another, to try and see who was the best or the maybe unofficial world chess champion. So that's something you can check out on your own, or maybe I'll do a future video about the match. But for today, I'm just going to cover chess strategies and tactics. And I wanted to start with an older game so you can see how things were different back almost 200 years ago. So the game begins with e4. A good strategy, controlling the center of the board. And remember, the square that the pawn sits on, the pawn doesn't really control that square because nothing's attacking that square that the pawn's on. But the pawn does help control the d5 square that it attacks. So the game continues with e5. A good strategy, if your opponent gains space in the center, you can equalize by gaining a fair share of the center for your side of the board. So now, things are pretty even. White attacks here, black attacks here, and they're fighting for control of the center, which is a great strategy because in the center, if you control that, it'll be more easily for you to move your pieces through the center to any other area on the board that may be important. If you're attacking on the king side and then your opponent's king castles to the queen side, you may have to shift gears and transfer pieces over to the queen side, and that's harder to do if the center is blocked. So now we have the bishops opening. So one piece of general strategy is to play knights before bishops because knights are slower and the knights are almost always well placed here on f3 and here on c3, or c6 or f6 for black. And also by playing the knights first, that's usually a good strategy because it gives you more time to see where it may be best to place your bishops. So the game continued here with the opponent copying. They both bring their bishops out early, and apparently this is the boy variation of the bishop's opening. And so the game continues with queen to e2. Now, one good chess strategy is that if you do bring your queen out, especially if you bring it out early, it's generally better to keep it back on the second or third rank. Sometimes a queen may end up here on the fourth rank, but by keeping the queen back and not placing it too far in the center, it's less likely that your opponent will be able to use the strategy of attacking your very valuable queen with less valuable pieces, sending the queen running and retreating, and giving your opponent more time to continue development while you're retreating. All right, so we have a knight developing to f6. The best move in the position according to the computer. Black develops the knight, attacks the center. Now he's ready to castle. So a good strategy is to find moves that accomplish more than one thing. So this knight move, it helps control squares in the center. It attacks an enemy pawn, although that pawn is protected by the queen. It also gets a piece off the back rank and allows the king to castle kingside here. So, it's generally a great idea to find moves that do more than one thing like this. And let's see how the game continues. So we have d3. White fortifies the central pawn. Now, another great strategy is to have your bishop outside of the pawn chain. Now, for beginners out there that don't know what a good or a bad bishop is, a good bishop would be one like this dark squared bishop that is on the opposite colored squares of your central pawns. So your central pawns are on the light colored squares, the same as this bishop. So this would be a bad bishop because it's blocked by its own pawns. And so a good strategy is to get that bishop outside of the pawn chain so that it's not blocked in behind your own pawns. So now we have Alexander McDonald developing his other knight. A good move, develop the knight to this fine square where it helps control squares in the center. And apparently this is the Boy variation, Lopez variation. And another good strategy is not, especially if you're a beginner, don't get too wrapped up in all the different openings out there. Try and find one good opening for white, one good opening for black, and stick with that opening for a while and slowly try and improve on your opening, maybe one move at a time after each game that you play, so you slowly get better with that opening. And instead of spending too much time studying openings, there's a lot of other areas, especially chess strategy and tactics. And I would say tactics is one of the most important, and I'll go over some of the tactics in this game as they happen. So we have c3 here. This is a great strategy. You push a flank pawn to help get ready to push your central pawn. And then if this pawn captures, well, then the flank pawn can capture towards the center. And white would end up with, possibly two pawns versus only one pawn in the center. And that can make a big difference because these central squares here are one of the most, probably the most important area on the board, unless your king's under attack, of course, then that would be more important. All right. A general guideline is not to move a piece twice in the opening like this. So this is an inaccuracy according to the computer, and the game swings in white's favor here to 0.42. Why did this knight retreat? Maybe he wants to copy his opponent, push this pawn, and then push this pawn. But let's see what happens here. Now we have another good, computer says this is a mistake, but strategically, we could point out what could be good about this move. Well, you have a less valuable flank pawn attacking a more valuable central pawn. And if black were to capture white's pawn on f4, that would help his opponent develop the bishop off the back rank. And a good strategy is to get your pieces developed off the back rank as fast as possible. You don't want to just attack with one or two pieces while your opponent is developing everything. It would kind of be like playing a football game with only part of your team, while your opponent has the entire team helping them and only a few of your players are in the game. And, that can be bad, of course. So the game continues with a capture and inaccuracy here. Pulling you capture the pawn, but after well, we don't have an immediate recapture here. First, this allows the pawn push, which forces the bishop to retreat. So black loses time with the retreat. White has gained a very strong center here. Now white grabs this pawn, but apparently that's a mistake. That it would have been better to just continue pushing forward, chasing the knight and gaining even more time. So the game continues with d6, maybe helping to discourage this pawn push a little bit. But the computer says that's a missed opportunity. It would have been better to immediately push to d5 here, attacking the bishop, attacking the pawn. You don't want to let your opponent just grab control of the center while you play passively and let them just control all these important squares in the middle. A lot of times, you need to counterattack in the center before your position is overrun. So we have a retreat here, a missed opportunity. Apparently bishop to g5 would have been better, lining up on these knights and the queen. So the game continues with knight attacking the bishop, the best move in the position. So after a retreat, we have castling by black. All right, a very good strategy is to get your king castled early and often, because the longer you leave a king in the center, the more likely it can be attacked, because it can be attacked straight on and from both sides here. So you have to kind of get that king castled quickly, because then it gives your opponent less avenues of attack. Now, if you castle, now the king can only be attacked head on or from one side here, because nothing can come from off the board on the right side here. All right, so this is I guess a defensive move being played to keep pieces out of this square, but this is a mistake according to the computer. It would have been better just to go ahead and develop this knight, and then white would be ready to castle. But after this mistake, we have black just continuing development, lining up on this pawn here along with the knight. So good tactics now. This could kind of be strategy. I mean, when you get to the bare basics of tactics, it's pretty much when you're attacking pieces and pawns, or the king. And a good tactic is to, pile up on a piece. This is kind of the basic tactic, is to have more attackers than defenders and try and win material. So we have a knight developing. So once again, I mentioned how you want moves that accomplish more than one thing. This gets the knight off the back rank. White could castle queenside now if he chooses to. The knight protects this pawn and covers a valuable square in the center. So now we have the queen lining up, but this is a mistake because the queen, you have 3 attackers and only 2 defenders. But, if the knight were to capture here, and then you capture with bishop or knight, the queen would not be able to recapture, or the queen would be lost. So that's something you have to watch out when it comes to tactics. You have to make sure that you check the order of the capturing pieces. You want to generally capture with the least valuable attacker first, and then the most valuable attacker at the end of a combination when it comes to tactics. All right, so we have castling queenside. Now, some strategy and tactics can come into play when you have opposite side castling. In that situation, you can press pawns forward and start attacking your opponent's position. Now, if you castle on the same side, that might not be a good idea, throwing your pawns forward, because then you'd be moving pawns in front of your king. But with opposite side castling, you can throw pawns forward at your opponent's king, and a lot of times it can be a race. Whoever gets those pawns going first and gets their attack in first can gain the upper hand and get an advantage. So the game continues with right away. Black starts throwing his pawns forward. And the idea behind a pawn storm is to throw the pawns forward at the enemy king and funnel your pieces in behind the pawns. So the pawns are used as battering rams to open up the position, and your pieces can funnel in behind them. So the king sidesteps the C file in case there's an exchange of pawns and this file opens up, and in the future a rook could be placed on the C file bearing down on the king. So he steps to the side, but this is an inaccuracy. Apparently it would have been better, once again, to just develop a piece here. You want to get your pieces off the back rank and into the action as fast as possible. All right, we have a capture, recapture. So material is all even, but black has the edge here in this game. So here we go. More pawn storming in action. Now, this apparently is a mistake. The computer does not like this move and says that this switches the game in favor of white here. Black had a decent little advantage, but now white has the slight edge. So apparently bishop to d7. Once again, developing the pieces off the back rank, connecting the rooks is a good strategy. And I'll explain that a little more once it actually happens. So here, the rooks are connected. They work better in tandem, protecting one another. And when you remove the pieces out from in between the rooks, now they have more squares available to them. And that helps them have the opportunity to move to open, half open files, where they can control more squares. So maybe a rook could move here and fight for the open C file. This rook could move here and fight on the half open F file. Or you could move rooks behind pawns that you've pushed forward, using the pawns as battering rams, and they're backed up by the rooks. And also you could place rooks behind pawns that you plan to exchange off, and then that will leave you with an open or half open file, which just gives your rooks more room to maneuver and more mobility. All right, finally, the bishop has moved off the back rank, but apparently it would have been better to just keep pushing that pawn, continuing a pawn storm. So the game continues with white finally getting a pawn storm moving with g4, but apparently this is a mistake. It would have been better to just go ahead and grab the open F file. And a great strategy is to, when you're not sure what to do in any given position, as long as there are no tactics. So before you make any move, you should check for checks, captures, and threats in that order. Checks first because they are the most forcing moves. Then any captures to make sure you're not just leaving a piece unprotected that could be captured, or that your opponent is leaving their king where you can check and gain an advantage, or they're leaving a piece unprotected that you can just go ahead and capture and gain a material advantage. So check for checks, captures, and threats in that order. And threats might mean just lining up on unprotected pawns or pieces, or lining up a more valuable piece on a less valuable piece. You get the idea. So if you don't know what to do, and you have a piece in your position that is your worst placed piece, try and figure out how you can improve that piece. And that's why it would have been better to bring this rook over to the half open F file where it would be a little bit stronger. All right, the game continues with this preventative defensive move. But, this pawn can still just push forward possibly and be attacking the knight and the pawn at the same time. So this kind of, pawn pushing forward, the H pawn, it kind of gives white a little lever to attack. You can push the pawn forward, then exchange here, and it kind of helps open things up on black's king. And, that's probably one reason this was a mistake. And it's a slow move. Bishop to c6 would have been better. Attacking in the center. A good strategy is when your opponent attacks on the flank, try to counterattack in the center, as that's the most valuable area on the board. All right, so we have the rook lining up on the king. Now, the computer doesn't like this move, says it's a missed opportunity, that g5, continuing the attack, would have been better. But a lot of times, as I mentioned before, you can line up a less valuable piece on a more valuable piece. Now, you might say, well, there's a pawn, a knight, another pawn in between the rook and the king. But, if things open up all of a sudden, you can have a discovered attack on that king. So the game continues with a4 here. The pawn storm continues, but now this is not the best move. It swings the game back in black's favor here. White's favor, I should say. And now bishop to c6, once again, would have been better. Kind of lining that bishop up down here through the center and towards the rook. So the game continues with the best move, a great move being found here. So you're attacking the knight and the pawn. So generally it's good to attack towards the center with your pawns. So maybe the black pawn would capture here on g5. And that would leave black with a half open H file. But after a recapture by the bishop, the knight would be pinned to the queen here. So let's see what happens. We do have the capture towards the center, the best move in the position. The bishop recaptures, but apparently it would have been better to capture with the knight. So that's pretty interesting. Now we have the pawn pushing forward, continuing this pawn storm. So we have b3 being played. This is a mistake, apparently. It would have been better to jump the knight forward, attacking the undefended bishop, and at the same time guarding the pawn on b2 in case of a capture. But now, this move is kind of understandable. You don't want to open things up even more in front of your king. But this pawn on a3 gives black a lot of space on the queen side and restricts the king a little bit, preventing the king from moving up to b2. So the game continues with finally this bishop landing on c6, but now the computer says it's a missed opportunity. So you can learn all about strategy and general chess principles, but you have to calculate before you make each move, because one little change in the position can mean that a move that was a great move earlier might not be the best move now, or it could even be a mistake because something has changed in the position. So the computer says that d5 here would have been better, gaining space for black. Let's go back. If d5 were played, it looks like, if this is played, could you possibly push here, with the tactic of adding more pressure to a pinned piece? Oh, okay. That couldn't be done. The pawn could not capture because of this battery. The queen would be captured. Then if the bishop captures, the rook could capture. So, that's something you have to look for when it comes to tactics. Pieces that are lined up on one another, and if a position opens up all of a sudden, there could be a discovered attack, which is a great tactic to keep an eye out for defense, and then also for offense if you're able to use it against your opponent. All right, let's get this moving a little bit. Bishop to c6 was played. Now the rook moves up here. Now it cannot be captured by the knight, because then we'd have a capture of the queen here. So the tactic of the pin here helps restrict the mobility of this knight, but the computer says this is a missed opportunity. It would have been better to leave that rook back where it was and just start pushing the h-pawn up, trying to open lines up against the opponent. So we have a repositioning of a bishop to a5. Apparently queen to e6 would have been better, breaking this pin. But what is this bishop doing here? Let's find out. The game, see, now this is what I was talking about. The h4 pawn is pushed forward, but now it's not the best move because there's been some changes in the position. So apparently rook to f1 would have been better. Maybe if there's a capture and knight captures, then you'd have a rook on this open file here. Or half open file. All right, so the game continues with capture, recapture. Okay, a general strategy here. So look at this. After this capture, this is a missed opportunity. Knight. Wow, okay. Let me go back. They're saying here that knight takes g4 would have been better. So then you're gaining a rook, and after the bishop captures, you could recapture that. So you would get 8 points of material for the for the queen that's worth 9 pawns, basically. So that is what the computer recommends. But instead, we have another a strategical situation that you have to be aware of. Generally, you don't want to give up your bishop pair unless you have a good reason. So after the knight captures, white still has their bishop pair, which can be dangerous on an open board. At the moment, things are not completely open, but this bishop pair could be more dangerous as the position opens up. Let's see what happens. We have a rook pressing forward here to a5, and inaccuracy once again. Queen to e6, breaking the pin would have been better. So now a blunder. We have a blunder here. Okay. Well, h5, we'll see why this is a blunder. Apparently, queen to f3 would have been better, getting out of the line of fire of the rook-queen battery here. So, but then you'd be under fire possibly by the bishop aimed that way. The blunder is played. Let's see if the opponent takes advantage of it with rook takes g5 here. All right, that might be hard to see, but let's find out. Nope. A brilliant move. Giving up the rook for a bishop. So after capture, which is best, we have the knight jumping forward, forking queen and bishop. So after the queen presses up here to f3, attacking the knight, Well, now the knight knocks out the bishop. And so white had a bishop pair, and now that has been knocked off the board. And that's a good strategy. If you do not have the bishop pair, but your opponent does, try to get rid of their bishop, one or both of them. That way they cannot use that extra bishop that you don't have to cover a square color complex across the board that their bishop would be more powerful on, and you don't have a bishop to counter them. So now, as an example, we have black with the light squared bishop on these light squares, whereas white does not have a bishop to counter this bishop. And so, that extra bishop here on c6 can be used to attack. And right now it's piling up on this pawn, and the pawn is pinned to the queen. So let's see what happens. The attack of the bishop is blocked. This is an inaccuracy. Apparently rook at h to g1 would have been better, threatening to start attacking the king. So the game continues with another brilliancy by black. So sacrificing the knight here. The pawn does not capture. So let's see if we can figure out why that pawn can't capture. Because if we have this, apparently now the queen could just capture. So something like this. The knight is under attack. So after queen takes d3 would be best. Bishop would just retreat. And at this point, black would be ahead by +1. So back to the game. We do have, let me go back a little bit. The knight captures. Now, this did unleash the tactic of the discovered attack. So we have a pawn being captured, and it looks like the rook could just capture here, but then the bishop would be able to capture the rook. So we double up, applying pressure to this pawn. If the pawn steps forward, well, then this pawn could capture possibly and break things open. So the game continues with a check. Great move here. If your opponent is building up an attack and you can ignore their attack in favor of a more powerful and forcing counterattack, and that dictates the flow of the game and basically forces your opponent to stop what they're doing and deal with your threats. So, it's looking serious here. The knights are piling up. What will be played next? Let's find out. So now we have king to a1 going into the corner. Apparently king to c2 would have been better, so I might as well take a quick look at that. If king to c2 is played, black, it looks like, is still winning here. You would have knight to e1, forking the queen and the king. And so that is why the king chose to run into the corner here instead, to avoid that fork. All right, so now we have the bishop capturing on e4. This is an inaccuracy. Apparently, knight takes e4 would have been better. So, should we take a look at that? Well, if the knight captures, there's a possible discovered attack on the queen once that knight moves. I guess we could take a quick look at it. It says that would be best. So capture there. That does allow white to capture with check, forcing the king over to h8 here. You don't want to go... Well, that's looking pretty dangerous. I mean, you wouldn't want to go here, of course, because then it would have been a mate. Um, so now queen up to f5, threatening a checkmate here. But there is queen to e5, the check, which would be a great move, forcing an exchange of the queens here, because this queen is unprotected. So once again, a great example of checking for, looking out for checks, captures, and threats in that order when it comes to tactics and strategy. Because no matter how good your strategy is, if you miss simple tactics, well, then the best strategy can fall apart because of that. And you have to look out for a check like this, which forks the queen and the king. And that's a good strategy and tactic to use when you're ahead, to start trading off material and neutralizing any threats by your opponent. So the game continued with bishop takes e4, attacking the queen. First, we have an attack on the king. King steps into the corner. And now the queen triples up here. So the threat is check. If the rook captures, well, then the queen would deliver a mate. If the king would go forward, then the queen could move here and deliver mate. So black has to do something and do it quickly. So let's see, what happens. And there's only one good move in this position. So let's see. Oh, a mistake is made, swinging the game in white's favor here. So apparently queen to f6 was the only good move here. And then the best thing for white to do apparently is play that. King can just step forward. You wouldn't want to capture here, of course, because that would lead to a mate. So the king would have to step forward. Now, this rook is unprotected, but there's a discovered attack possibility here that's looking dangerous. So here it looks like white's best move would be to give up the queens. Give up his queen, trade queens. So after capture, we have an attack here, and the king is forced to move up. Now the rook could be captured here. What would be best? Apparently knight to c4. All right, but anyway, I'm not going to dig too much deeper because we need to finish this game out. In the game, we had this mistake being made, and now the best move would be rook to h7 check, which would probably be a little hard to find here, maybe, because the king could just step up and capture, but then this pawn could capture with check, and it's looking dangerous for the black king. So we have an immediate capture here and a check. Another reason to really watch out for the checks, because you never know when that could turn the tide of the game. It looks like white is still ahead here, pretty much winning. This is a blunder, though, leading to a mate in 6 possibility. So apparently, the only good move would be knight to b1. So blocking the check, and it's not a mate because the rook is covering there. So kind of like an X-ray tactic, kind of. The queen is blocking the path of the rook, from guarding this square. But once the queen captures, then the rook will guard that square on b1. All right, so the game continues. Excuse me, before I continue the game, let's see what should have been played. Well, here, after a block by that knight, white would be winning after capture. Now it doesn't like that. It's saying queen takes g3, which would get rid of a valuable attacking piece. But then you would have this rook move. King is forced to g8. And then, that looks dangerous, but the king can capture here. And after rook to h1 check, king to g7, and capture, promoting to a queen. So what would black do then? At this point, white would be ahead. All right, back to the game. We had this blunder after capture here, which is best. Now you have queen captures, knight captures, and the rook checks here. So the king moves. We have a capture leading to, well, the king would be able to step in front of the pawn and prevent the promotion. So maybe it would have been better to capture with the rook there. So here, apparently that's the best move, is to capture the rook, allowing the promotion to a queen, and then knight to c2 mate. So a crazy knight ending here. We have a knight delivering mate. The pawn is cutting off an escape along with this knight. So trapped in by the knights and a pawn, even though there was a promotion to a queen. All right, well, I'll do future videos like this, maybe do a part 2, and I'll play through more games. This was an older game from 1834, so there were more mistakes in it, but I'll slowly progress up to more and more modern games and point out and highlight more chess tactics, strategy as I go through the game. But I thought this was an interesting game to look at. And if you're interested in Alexander McDonald and Louis de la Bourdonnais' giant battle that they had in the 1800s, I encourage you to check out those players. They played, I believe, a few matches and quite a few games against one another, trying to determine who was the unofficial world chess champion. So anyway, feel free to leave comments. As always, like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching, and have a super chess day.